European bank stocks plunge as investors remain nervous about the sector after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank last week and ongoing turmoil at Credit Suisse.
Tensions mount between Washington and Moscow after a Russian fighter jet struck an American surveillance drone over the Black Sea.
Another wave of strike action across France as opponents continue to protest against President Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms.
As hundreds of thousands of workers take to the picket lines, the UK Finance Minister announces a new budget aimed at easing the cost of living.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is in Moscow for talks with ally Vladimir Putin as his country heads into its 13th year of civil war.
European banks were rocked by another turbulent session on Wednesday amid concerns over the global fallout from the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank last week and ongoing turmoil at Credit Suisse. Switzerland's second largest bank, Credit Suisse, fell by nearly 25% before a halt in trading during the morning. By midday, European banks were down more than 6% on London's FTSE 100 index. In Paris, French bank Société Générale fell by 10.6% and BNP Paribas by 10.3%. Credit Suisse has been plagued by a series of financial scandals. On Wednesday, its biggest shareholder, the Saudi National Bank, said it wouldn't be shoring up its investments. Stocks had rallied on Tuesday after unprecedented intervention from U.S. authorities to contain spillover from SVB. But investors fear the U.S. federal bank could speed up interest rate rises in the face of ongoing inflationary pressure.
Frayed relations between Washington and Moscow have become even more tense after a Russian fighter jet struck an American surveillance drone over the Black Sea on Tuesday, forcing the US to bring it down in international waters. The White House is calling it reckless and unsafe, while Moscow has described it as a provocation.
What we saw, again, were fighter aircraft dumping fuel in front of this UAV and then getting so close to the aircraft that it actually damaged the propeller on the MQ-9. Because of the damage, we were in a position to have to essentially crash it into the Black Sea.
Russia's ambassador to the US was later summoned to the State Department, but not before justifying the actions of the Russian pilots.
This drone can carry 1,700 kilos of explosives. This drone can carry a few bombs. You see that what will be the reaction of United States if you see such Russian drone very close, for example, to San Francisco or New York? What will be reaction of United States? For me, it's clear.
Russian and US aircraft have operated over the Black Sea since the start of the war, but this is the first known interaction. The Pentagon has warned such actions could lead to miscalculation and unintended escalation. A prominent German politician has issued a scathing assessment of her country's drive to boost its military following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Parliamentary Commissioner for the Armed Forces, Eva Hügel, claims not a single euro of a €100 billion fund approved by MPs had been spent.
Ich beginne mal mit dem Thema Material und fasse das in den Satz zusammen, die Bundeswehr hat von allem zu wenig. Und sie hat seit dem 24. Februar 2022 noch weniger. Das betrifft die Ausbildung, das betrifft die Übungen und das betrifft auch die Ausstattung im Einsatz.
Last year, Chancellor Scholz received a standing ovation in Parliament when he announced the end of Germany's pacifist tradition. The policy included a commitment to NATO's spending target of 2% of GDP for defence, as well as the new special military fund. Hügel also cast doubt over whether a goal of recruiting 203,000 soldiers by 2031 would be achieved. Her criticism joins a chorus of lawmakers and officials who have called for faster supplies and funding for the military. Despite the lack of spending on its own forces, Germany has sent large amounts of military aid to Ukraine over the past year and recently promised to send its highly sought-after Leopard 2 tanks.
A replica of the concrete punishment cell that Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny is periodically held in has been unveiled near the Louvre in Paris. The installation shows the conditions that the opposition politician has been subjected to in the penal colony in the Vladimir region where he's being detained. Navalny has spent more than 100 days of the past 6 months in the punishment cell. His team said they set up the replica to raise awareness of the dire conditions he faces.
The Russian lower house has approved an amendment, which, if approved by the upper house and President Putin, will punish anyone who publishes false information or attempts to discredit the volunteer groups fighting in Ukraine with up to 15 years in prison. This is an extension of the laws passed by the Russian government a year ago, which sought to suppress any criticism of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine. Yevgeny Prigozhin, leader of the mercenary group Wagner, welcomes the news, having asked the Russian parliament in January to extend the laws to ban negative media reports about his men. Up until now, it was only Russia's military that was protected. This comes on the same day that the Lithuanian parliament declared Wagner a terrorist group. In its resolution, it states that Russian mercenaries have committed serious crimes, which amounts to terrorism. Wagner has played an important role in Russia's offensive, but the Battle of Bakhmut has revealed tensions between the group's leadership and the Russian army.
In France, opponents of President Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms staged an 8th round of strikes across the country on Wednesday. Thousands of union members and others joined rallies in cities including Marseille, Rennes and Paris. They're hoping that another show of solidarity will reinforce workers' massive opposition to the plan, promoted by Macron, as central to his vision for making the French economy more competitive. The protests come as a joint committee of senators and lower house lawmakers examine the controversial bill that would see the retirement age in France rise from 62 to 64. The Senate is expected to approve it on Thursday due to its conservative majority, but the situation at the National Assembly is not so clear-cut. Such is the anger in some sectors that unions have called for indefinite strikes. They include rail and air transport, power stations, natural gas terminals and rubbish collection. Garbage is already piled high on the streets of Paris.
Against the backdrop of a cost of living crisis and widespread strikes, the UK government has unveiled a budget it hopes will ease the financial burden of millions across the country. Presenting the measures to Parliament, Britain's Finance Minister, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, acknowledged the impact of falling wages, but indicated the government would not concede to strikes.
Inflation destroys the value of hard-earned pay, deters investment and foments industrial strife. High inflation, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the root cause of the strikes we've seen in recent months. We will continue to work hard to settle those disputes, but only in a way that does not fuel inflation. Part of the fall in inflation predicted by the OBR happens because of additional measures I take today.
The budget includes assistance with soaring energy costs and expands childcare provision, but offers little in terms of public pay increases. Anger over economic pressures has manifested itself in several days of industrial action across key sectors, including transport, education and health. Tens of thousands of junior doctors have been taking part in a 3-day strike in the lead-up to today's budget. The Conservative government is trailing behind the Labour opposition in the polls. It's far from clear that today's measures will do much to reverse that position.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is in Moscow to meet with his top ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin, as the Kremlin steps up efforts to restore ties between Turkey and Syria. The visit comes on the anniversary of the uprising turned civil war in Syria. Moscow has played a pivotal role in fighting back armed opposition groups trying to topple Assad's government through its military support and has aggressively backed Damascus against opponents at the United Nations. In a statement, the Kremlin said the talks would aim to strengthen ties in political, trade, economic and humanitarian spheres, as well as the prospects for a comprehensive settlement of the situation in and around Syria. Russian media said relations between Damascus and Ankara would also be on the table. The civil war in Syria has killed nearly 500,000 people and displaced half the country's pre-war population.
Liverpool will be hoping for a miracle when they face reigning champions Real Madrid in the last 16 of the Champions League this evening after being swept aside at Anfield in the first leg. Los Blancos romped to a 5-2 victory in England 3 weeks ago, thanks in no small part to a brace from Karim Benzema, who, like fellow Frenchman Ferland Mendy, is set to make his return to the starting lineup. Madrid are expected to miss David Alaba due to injury, while Jurgen Klopp will be without Luis Diaz, Jordan Henderson and Thiago Alcantara.
If there is only 1% chance, I would like to give it a try. So we are here to play an extremely strong opponent and try to win the game tomorrow. And as difficult as it is, that's probably possible. Not likely, but possible.
Napoli, meanwhile, will be keen to pick up from where they left off as they host Frankfurt on the back of a 2-0 first leg win in Germany. Unless Oliver Glasner's men achieve something special, the Italian club look likely to reach the quarter-finals of the Champions League for the first time in their history.